Сайн байцгаана хүн үзэгчдээ. Өнөөдөр орой манай Facto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Канадын нийтийн үйлчилгээний комиссийн дарга ерөнхийлөгч Мария Barrados оролцож байна.
Мария Barrados. Хадагтай Мария Barrados 2004 оноос хойш Канадын нийтийн үйлчилгээний комиссийн даргаар ажиллаж байна. Социологч мэргэжилтэй бөгөөд аудит үнэлгээ, статистикийн шинжилгээний чиглэлээр мэргэжсэн. Хадагтай Barrados 1966 онд Saskatchewan-ы их сургуулийг социологч мэргэжлэр төгссөн. 1970 онд McGill их сургуульд социологийн мастер, 1978 онд Carleton-ы их сургуульд социологийн доктор зэрэг хамгаалсан. 1975 онд Carleton-ы их сургуулиас ажлын гараагаа эхэлсэн бөгөөд Канадын аудитын газарт олон жил ажилласан туршлагатай. 1992 онд холбооны медалаар шагнагдсан нөхөр нэг хүүхэдтэй. Хадагтай Barrados Нидерланд улсад төрсөн боловч Канада улсын иргэн болсон бөгөөд Оттава хотод амьдарч байна.
Good evening, Ms. Barrados.
Good evening.
Welcome to my show.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Within just 2 months, you have visited Mongolia twice. So please tell us what brought you here and what is the mission?
Well, I have a very interesting project that I'm working on. I'm working with the Civil Service Council of Mongolia, and they are looking at reforming how they operate and their position in Mongolia. So we are working on that reform project with them.
What is the background of this project? I understand there is certain agreement between two governments. Please tell us about that.
We started out by having some discussions between officials. And the Mongolians approached us and said, you know, we really would like to hear more and learn more about how you do things in your country. The result of that was we signed a memorandum of understanding between the Civil Service Council and the Public Service Commission of Canada. And that was in the presence of both Prime Ministers, so Prime Minister Harper from Canada and Prime Minister Batbolt from Mongolia. The result of that is that we defined particular areas of exchange and work. So there are areas of our expertise, so things that we as Canadians can offer, and things that the Mongolians are interested in hearing from us.
But before we go into these details, what are you doing? Please tell us about your organization, the status, who is nominating you, are you independent, and since when this service started, please?
Well, the Public Service Commission of Canada has been around for a long time, over 100 years. We celebrated our 100th anniversary in 2008.
Good for you.
And it was an opportunity to really celebrate. Its origins is very interesting. It came about because there was a consensus amongst politicians, driven by the Canadian public, that they wanted a public service that was non-partisan, that was merit-based, so it means you got into the public service by what you know, not who you know, and that there was no influence of ministers in the appointments. To get that, a public service commission, at that time was called Civil Service Commission, was established. And it's a
like
very...
in Mongolia, civic service. Today we have civic service council, yes.
Yes, same name. And it was established and set up in a very independent manner. So it has a direct link to Parliament. It makes the appointments. It's responsible for the appointments in the public service. And it has a public voice. And now, I, for example, am appointed only with the approval of the Parliament, and I can only be dismissed by the Parliament. Nobody else can dismiss me.
Please tell us the reason why you have changed it public into Public Service Commission and from Civic Service Commission. What does it make difference?
It happened in 1968. And when we started over 100 years ago, the Civil Service Commission of Canada was responsible for many things. It had training, it had organization of government, it had classification, it had pay. And in time, there was a change in the roles. So in 1968, we had a change in legislation, and it redefined the role much more precisely and more focused on merit and appointments and nonpartisanship. And in that legislative change, the name was changed to Public Service Commission of Canada. Now, at the same time in Canada, there was a lot of review and discussion about the expectation that Canadians had of their government and their public service. And that was the beginning of the focus on service to the public, standards of service, and having people in the public service who would provide these services.
The state service is there to provide services to public.
The public service, that service, they are paid for by the taxes of the population.
Yes.
That service is there to deliver on the wishes of the government of the day, but they must operate within the law and in the public interest to provide services to the population.
And those services are provided by or coordinated by ministries of government and other agencies, whatever. Correct?
The direction, so the policy decision, we are going to provide such and such a service, is a political decision. So the politician is the one, they are the ones in the government of the day will decide the type of service. But then the actual delivery of the service, that has to be the public service. And that has to be fair.
Fair.
It has to be equal. Every citizen should be treated in the same way. And citizens should feel that their government, through the public service, is serving them fairly.
You change the name, and with the name, certain concept is being changed. And then with that changes, which is merit-based and non-partisan, is it true that after 13 years of the previous government, when it had left, non-political, non-government public servant is changed because it's political belongings?
In our public service, when the government changes, the public service does not change, unless an individual public servant decides to leave.
Himself or herself.
That's correct. But there is no changes in the public service like you will see, for example, in the United States. I mean, it's a democracy where you see big changes in the public service. For Canada, it's extremely important that we don't have those changes. We are not a small country compared to Mongolia, but we're not a big enough country that we can actually afford to have instability. So we need the stability, we need the continuity, and we need the professional expertise. And we can't get that by always changing it. So we need a continuity.
So based on your observation from your previous trip in June, during which there was a large conference of public services in the country, what is your take on that? How do you see the problems to address in this country?
Well, I'm very optimistic about Mongolia, and that's why I keep coming back.
Okay.
And the reason I'm optimistic is the people I am speaking to, and I've talked to politicians, I've talked to parliamentarians, I've talked to civil servants, are very reform-minded. They want to make it better. Now, having an idea about how to make it better and actually doing it is, of course, the challenge, because there's many things you have to change. But this past visit, we were working very hard. I mean, they actually took us out of Ulaanbaatar, and we went to the countryside, started early in the morning, worked all evening, all day long, all evening, and we're going again the next day to try and make sure that we had clear understanding of what the Mongolians would like to achieve, and from the Canadian side, what we could assist them with, so how we could help.
Where you think that you can assist Mongolia to make this reform of public service?
Well, I have a lot of experience in three areas. I'm an academic originally.
Yes, you have been working as a professor.
Yes.
Carleton University.
That's right. But that was a long time ago.
Right.
And then I spent years in the Office of the Auditor General. So I am very concerned about management, and in those days it was financial management. And then I went to Public Service Commission, where it's human resource management. So what I can bring to Mongolia is all that management experience in terms of how to get the ideas and try and implement them, operationalize them. And I can bring from Canada the experience we have and the information we have, the systems and the expertise. So this visit, for example, I have 3 people with me, 2 top lawyers, and another management person with expertise in development in countries coming out from the Soviet Union. So I can bring those kinds of people when I come.
Have you initially highlighted a particular field or problems you will address as your priority?
Well, the first thing that we're looking at is actually the statute. So the statute for the Civil Service Council.
Okay.
And so we've been working on proposals for amendment to the statute, just to make sure that the whole thing pushes towards merit and nonpartisanship, and has the appropriate oversight and enforcement powers. You have to have a principle, but you have to be able to implement the principle, and you have to make sure that if it doesn't go, that you can correct.
Do you have a particular restrictions of size of government compared to your economy? I mean, government cannot grow forever.
Of course.
So if there is a certain, in particular, parameter that you orient for?
That's an interesting question. You know, I'm asked that all the time. And when you add up all of government in Canada, so you include the military, you include teachers, you include doctors, so the hospital, medical sector, we're about 10%, which is pretty high.
10% of the GDP?
10% of the population.
Population is, okay.
Yeah, or public servants. So my answer to that is, every country has to decide what services are going to be delivered by the public sector, which ones by the private sector. And what may work in Canada may not be appropriate in your situation. Canada is a very large country, and we are highly decentralized. So we have federal governments, we have provincial governments, and then large cities have strong municipal governments, and they're fairly autonomous. With that, you get a lot of public servants.
Your commission's job is to make the standard, all right, of operation of hiring and firing, promoting public officers. But you do not do yourself that hiring and firing process. How does it work, please?
Well, we in fact have the power. We have the appointment power, which means that we are the ones who can make the appointments. Now, we have taken an approach of where we're saying, no, we're not going to do it for everybody in the federal government, but we have moved to a delegated model, which means that we work an arrangement with the heads of the departments and agencies where they use our authorities. I have a formal agreement, so they have our authorities. But with that, they're required to report back to me. I review, I oversee, I audit, and I do investigations of individual cases as well.
Independently?
Absolutely. If I find something wrong, I can take people out of the public service.
Including the minister?
No, public servants.
Servants.
I have.
But public servants is those who is under the minister?
The public servants
Everybody under the minister.
Under the minister. I do not have the authority over your secretary generals. So everyone below, I can take them out of the public service if they have gotten there improperly. I can impose conditions. I can impose corrective actions. I can take away the appointment authority.
Tell us the example.
Well, I have had a few, but we have done different things in different situations. So, for example, should I name the organization? I guess that's all right. Our Canadian Space Agency. And I'm very proud of our Canadian Space Agency because we work with the Americans and we've had a number of astronauts. So they
one of the leading agencies in the world.
Well, the Americans are ahead of us, but we've gone with the Americans. They had enormous problems in doing a number of their staffing activities. So we had done an audit. We found these problems. So we then said to them, all right, you are using the Commission's authority. From here on in, before you do any appointments, you have to check with us. So we will review everything.
Wow.
And we did. And they have improved. So we reviewed again, and we have given back the authority. So they learned.
Your equivalent in Mongolia has a lot of things to do in this regard, I believe. Personally, the media says we see that people being hired because their political partisanship to the minister or whoever ruling the ministry, and or to the place where they were born in the same provinces. What is the best way to address the issues? Certainly it is not merit-based.
Well, you have to enforce the merit base. You should not be getting into the public service because of your politics, but it should not prevent you from getting into the public service either. As a citizen, you have rights to be politically active. Yes. But that's not why you should be getting into the public service. So it's very important that there's a clear statement of what the requirements of a job are. Mm-hmm. There's a very strong, firm assessment of those requirements. Mm-hmm. And then you pick the person who's best suited to do the job.
You do announce it publicly?
The job?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
This is the law, or rules, or regulations, what they do.
In our case, we have general requirements. The Commission will set the specific requirements. Mm-hmm. My specific requirement is every job has to be advertised in some way.
Mm-hmm. In some way.
And there has to be even if you don't advertise, so if you do it, there can be special circumstance where you don't advertise, there still has to be a statement that that's what you've done.
So in order to hire people merit-based, you end up competing with private sector. It is probably a matter of good compensation or certain incentives, bonuses. How does it work?
Well, in our case, and I know Mongolia is asking a lot of questions of itself about compensation. In our case, we do some benchmarking against the private sector. And what we find is the most junior executive in the public service is compensated in a comparable manner to the private sector. Mm-hmm. And we benchmark that. Mm-hmm. So that salary is the same as you would find in the private sector. Below that, they actually tend to be paid a little more, so we tend to be a little more attractive. Above that, they're not paid as well as the private sector. But those people, somebody like myself, for example, I'm in the public sector because I'm committed to the public sector. And I'm paid well enough. I don't need to do better in the private sector.
So the same case with Singapore, I understand. And the minister compensation is comparable in that particular sector, private sector, CEOs of large 3 companies, etc.
Singapore, their senior, so their secretary generals are paid as the same. They're benchmarked against the private sector. So their salaries are higher than they would be in Canada. Our secretary generals are not benchmarked against the private sector.
If there is any benefits in terms of pension, in terms of housing, compared to the people who is not working in public sector?
We don't have a lot. There's some countries who do. They do housing and they provide some extra travel, support for family. We don't do very much of that. We give a good salary. We give a very good pension. The advantage over the public sector as opposed to the private sector is you have a continuity of employment.
Almost guaranteed employment as soon as you are doing your job well.
Yeah, it's not 100%. Like we go through changes, but you have a much greater certainty of employment. The second advantage to the public sector that you don't have in the private sector is you have all of government to move into. So you can be a public servant and work in many different sectors. So you have a very interesting, challenging career over a lifetime.
You have been working as Assistant Auditor General.
Right.
What was the job about that?
Now, my background is I'm a sociologist, which means I've had a lot of training in measurement and evaluation. And I went to the Office of the Auditor General, and I was working with all these accountants. The practice in the Office of the Auditor General is of two types. One is the financial statements. So this is the certification of the financial statements. And the other practice is the determination whether there was value for money for the expenditure. So this is looking...
It all has to do with the state public offices,
state-owned companies.
State-owned companies.
Yes.
Do you have state-owned companies?
Yes, we do.
In which sector?
Different sectors.
Okay, so you are dealing with the checking of all state-owned enterprises, public offices, their financial statements, whether it's correct or not.
And whether the expenditure was for value for money.
Oh, that's very interesting. I think new concept. I think that's what we fight for as citizens in this country. Value for money, right?
Value for money.
Yes.
So that means that you take a look at a program expenditure, and the money could be very well properly reflected in the financial statements. But did you get your money's worth, basically, is the question. So if you spent several millions of dollars, did the citizens get the service?
Outcome, output, right?
Did you get the results you were looking for? Was it a fair contract? Were the services delivered as intended?
Okay.
So I spent 18 years at the Office of the Auditor General.
And what was the most challenge for?
Well,
was it the measurement system? Was it a non-delivery? Could you measure it? How you were monitoring it?
The most challenging thing, of course, always is measurement. We're a developed country. We have many measurement systems. But how do you really determine those things? That's always a challenge. And are the measures there that you are looking for? At the end of the day, though, as the auditor in value for money, you collect all the evidence and you're making a judgment. So you're looking whether people have planned properly, you're looking whether they've clearly set out what they were going to do, and did they deliver? And in some cases, you have to do a fair bit of testing. So I can give you some examples. In Canada, there's a social insurance number.
Yep.
And that's a number that you have to get employment benefits and other benefits. We did a review of that system to see if that system was working the way it was anticipated. And we found all kinds of numbers with no people attached. And there had been a commitment to fix it, and they hadn't fixed it. So we write a report.
Well, often at times here, our public officers, politicians, talk about inputs. They say we will invest that much of money, that much of resources here and there. But at the end, we don't see exactly the result. I mean, we're not interested in how much they invested. We're more interested in what is that for.
You want to have both.
Money.
You want to have both.
Yes.
You want to know what it cost, and you want to know what you got for it.
Okay.
That's very important.
This Auditor General work probably also is associated with what you do today.
Absolutely. Because at the Auditor General, I certainly learned how to do audits. And by the time I left, I was responsible for large financial audits as well. And the regime we have at the Public Service Commission is you really do want managers to manage. You want them to take on the challenges of delivering the programs and services, but you have to oversee and check. So that's the approach that I have taken in the current position I'm in as well.
Well, for bolts and nuts of creating or fixing democracy in this country, that's what we need, I think, in the development of our public service. There is not always coming the result. Well, there are results, of course, but we are more critical. We really want this value for money. And this tax expenses is becoming sometimes really out of reach, very big. It's almost now in reaching the half level of the economy now, government expenditure. And that's why we just start to keep asking, and we want to have the system that is working. And Canadian system is working. It's very famous all around the world. We are very glad that our government is working with you. At this trip, you came not alone.
That's right.
Yeah. Please tell us the mission of the delegation.
Well, my delegation was composed, I think I mentioned, I have 3 people with me. I have a specialist in the Public Service Employment Act. So he knows the human resource management legislation probably the best in Canada.
And he will be reviewing our documents.
He's working with people here on your documents.
Mm-hmm.
And I have with me also an expert in the Financial Administration Act.
Okay.
Because they go together. You talk about human resource management, talk about financial management, but in actual fact in government, one of your largest expenditures is on the salary bill.
Yes.
So they do work together, and the legislations work together. So those 2 individuals...
So that means he is to work also Minister of Finance as well?
He came from the Office of the Auditor General.
Is he working with our Auditor General office?
No, he came to the Public Service Commission, and he's working with my team now. He's recently retired. He's working with my team to help with the conceptualizing and the drafting instructions for the change to the Civil Service Council legislation. And I have a 3rd person with me who worked on the public service reform in the Ukraine, a very large project that was supported by our development agency. And she helps me because one of the things we are looking for, of course, is financial support from our development agency because it's expensive to get here.
It's a big project, a big budget too.
Yes, and she helps with that.
See.
And then, of course, we benefit from her experience in the Ukraine.
Well, it's quite a comprehensive team.
It is.
By the way, in our country, the ambassadors are nominated or finally approved by the president. How does this same system work in Canada?
In our system, the ambassadors, most of the time, and I'm saying most of the time, our system's not perfect. It's very good, but it's not perfect. Most of the time come from the public service, and they're career public servants. The ambassador to Mongolia is a career public servant. He is nominated by the public service, but that is approved by the Prime Minister.
Approved by the Prime Minister?
Our Prime Minister.
It is also going through your committee?
The actual nomination of the ambassador is not. The person's career through the public service has been my responsibility.
That's also an interesting type of public servants in the country. So overall, you are at the very interesting time of Mongolian reform in a political sense, in a political public governance. And I wish we have a more reflecting from your experience. You said non-perfect, but still all faults, mistakes, and achievements. So in this regard, what will be the next action of 2 commissions?
The Civil Service Council is working on draft legislation. And of course, what we would like is to have the Parliament deal with that legislation before the end of this session. And then the next task is to take the concepts and ideas and put them to work, to implement them. Now, to implement, you need training, you need people knowledgeable, you need tools. So there's a lot of things you have to do to implement. Sometimes the hardest part actually is implementing.
It is always. Planning is one thing, implementing. How do you see the current level of cooperation of two governments?
In our sector,
yes.
And I can only...
In general,
well,
also.
In the sector that I deal with, it's excellent. Our prime ministers have very good relationships. Ministers that I've dealt with, it's been excellent cooperation. There are some issues. So to say it's perfect, I think that's, again, not correct. But certainly I couldn't ask for more in the relationship.
There is a very growing, I understand, interests from Canadian side, because you have recently opened an embassy.
Right.
And very active embassy, in particular in this field like you are representing. We are very happy about that. And also at the level of other political leadership. Prime Minister, other ministers are actively visiting. What is coming now, next?
Well, what I would like to see next is I would like to see a larger project that supports the implementation, because I think this country would benefit enormously from a very strong merit-based, nonpartisan public service. There have been a lot of studies and that really tie whether you're a democracy or not, actually, or developing or not. The strength of your development and your society is closely tied to the strength of your public service.
You obviously also like Mongolia. Well, I mean, like...
I do.
Like,
I do.
Mining revenue is important to Canadian public revenue, right?
Mining revenue is an indirect benefit because it means a benefit for Canadian business. And if Canadian business benefits, the government and the people of Canada benefit.
Yeah, very interesting way to put it. Well, it was very interesting to talk to you. I believe what we have talked today will have a lot of reflection, I hope, in our reform. And hopefully your next trip will be another interesting topic to discuss. Probably by that time we will have this reform as you have in mind and we have in mind. And thank you for coming to Mongolia, doing this job. And it's a very interesting work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. За хүн зөвлөгчтэй өнөөдөр манай нэвтрүүлэгт Канадын манайхаар бол төрийн зөвлөл гэдэг. Канад бол нийтийн үйлчилгээний хороо гэж нэрлэдэг. Энэ хорооны ерөнхийлөгч Barrados оролцлоо. Баярлалаа.